questions in the subheading that says questions for interns. You can ask questions yourself, or you can ask through me and Ananya.
Okay, so we are live, and I'm going to pass it off to Priya so that she can introduce our speaker for the day.
Hi, everyone. It is my honor to introduce our speaker. Becky Sinkler, first and foremost, is our very own Vote That Jawn editor and writer for our blog. Becky started in the realm of writing and journalism as a graduate from the University of Pennsylvania. She then worked for a local news outlet, the Ambler Gazette. From there, Becky joined the Philadelphia Inquirer and worked her way up through the staff, becoming book editor. In 1983, Becky finally became the editor of the New York Times Book Review, working in that position for 11 years. Today, Becky's work is instrumental to Vote That Jawn's mission, and she serves as a role model to all aspiring journalists. Without further ado, I will pass it off to our speaker, Becky Sinkler.
Thank you, Priya. That was very nice, but I want to correct you. I don't think I really should be a role model, because although these Monday morning meetings have all entailed people telling you how to do things right, I am here to tell you how not to do things wrong, which is not a very subtle distinction. This story started out when Lorraine Carey, who is the founder and editor, chief honcho of Vote That Jawn, mentioned to me that she had gotten her hands on some not laptops, but tablet computers that were really expediting the registering vote process. For youth, it was just such an answer to their prayers, because all that paperwork could be gotten rid of. And we thought, well, where'd you get them? And it turned out there was a story behind that. There was a terrific teacher, and I'll get you all the details in a minute, but he had found an organization in South Philly that had raised money enough, or had actually, they had these 5 laptops originally. And then they lent them to the high school teacher, and he had an assembly, and they demoed how easy it was. They all decided to go back and raise more money and get 50 more. And we thought, wow, this is a great story. We're right on the verge of getting delivery on these 50 tablets, and these kids are going to go out in the streets, and they're going to their homes, and they're going to do online registration, and bang, Philadelphia School District closed the schools. So there was no way to have any kind of distribution of these tablets. There was no way to coordinate, and it was an enormous bust. But meanwhile, I had written this story saying that it was going to happen. And not only was the story bust because of the outcome, but I realized when I'd written this story, what a terrible job I did. I had done my research, and I'd called Tom Quinn, who was this wonderful teacher, and he had given me an hour of his time, and I had asked all the questions, and he had answered them. And then I got with my notes, and I started to write. And E.M. Forster has a wonderful quote that I have always loved. He said, "How do I know what I think till I see what I write?" And so I started writing, and I realized I didn't know what I thought, because I had failed to get so many of the facts and write them down correctly. The main problem was sequence. I couldn't figure out when that first batch came and when they raised the money. And I just had a hot mess of a story. So I came to the point where you do when you're reporting, you say either I have to fix this or I have to ditch the whole effort. And I thought I really liked this guy. I really loved the idea of the story, and I didn't yet know that the schools were going to close. So I thought it was still definitely worth doing, so I'd have to go back. And so this is a story of how you rescue a mess when you've made it. And basically, the story is all right now. I fixed it. I had to rewrite it to suit the ending. And actually, I thought, well, this isn't a bad little story. I'll pitch it to a newspaper. So about 2 nights ago, I emailed the Philadelphia Citizen, which is a wonderful alternate newspaper in Philadelphia. And I said, would you be interested in this story? And I waited and waited, expecting to be rejected, because 9 out of 10 times you get rejected. And they took it. So now it's going to appear in print, and I can talk about how it happened and what I did and what not to do, and answer any of the questions that you guys have about that. So we can start with some of the questions that you guys have already sent me, or would you like to ask them live, or how should we proceed?
I think we'll be asking our questions live.
Okay, great.
So I think you've already sort of answered this to an extent, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you really arrived at the angle and like the way you positioned your story, because I think that's the first really important step of writing it.
Actually, the first draft of my story was pretty boring. I mean, you really want to go for a good lead. And for some reason, I thought, really misguidedly, I thought the way to start the story was, it's all about paperwork and what a nuisance it is, and how boring, and this guy had finally found the answer to it. So that was pretty bad. I really was taken by Tom Quinn. He's a passionate teacher. He teaches civics and government or something, social science and civics at Central High School. And he's been doing it for 14 years. And he has all kinds of wonderful, I mean, you'll find out, I'm sure you all know as journalists, if any of you have done this much, you get far, far, far more information than you can ever use. But he was fascinating. He told me about all these methods he used to get students energized and excited about voting. They write their own bills, and they do all kinds of live, hands-on civic work. And I wanted to tell this guy's story, and he was very enthusiastic too, while he thought it was going to work. So that angle of the paperwork thing, I ditched on my second effort and made it really about his triumph over the logistics of registering and how he thought he'd found the answer. That was the angle. And you need an angle. I mean, that's one of the first things you have to, how am I going to come out? And that'll usually give you your lead sentence, which is very important too.
Great, thank you for answering that question. So now we have a couple questions about journalism, related to journalism. What does your process of interviewing and writing usually look like? And why do you think it went wrong this time?
Okay, the first thing you do when you decide on a story is you do the preliminary research, which nowadays is so much easier with Google and with the internet. You can, I Googled Tom Quinn because I didn't know anything about him. I got a lot of information about what he does, all the awards he's been given. I mean, he's legendary. He's known as the superhero of the Philadelphia youth vote. And I thought that was pretty cute. Then what I usually do is I just take a Pages document or a Word document, and I write down as many questions as I want to ask this man. Oh, I also researched some of the things like the organization that he raised the money with. It's called CMAC, which stands for Southeast Asian something Association Coalition. And it's a very good South Philly organization for refugees and immigrants. And they had a bunch of youth doing registration too. And so I looked up that place. I actually called them, made a few calls. I wanted to prepare myself to be intelligent enough to ask him questions so he didn't think I just picked up a phone and said, "Who are you?" So you write down all those questions. Then I called him. You have to make an appointment, and usually that's not easy. Sometimes it's very hard. And some people that I called on this particular project never got back to me, and you sort of expect that, and then you have to decide whether it's worth really pursuing them or you can just cut to the chase. And this was going to be a very short piece, hopefully. And I just decided not to waste my time getting a lot of extraneous comments and things like that. I had plenty of material. So process. Then I called him, and when we talk on the telephone, I just type in the answers. I leave space after each question. I type in the answers. And this is where I did badly, because I didn't really get the dates right. This little sequence was, he heard about these laptops, he got his hold of the organization in South Philly that had 5 of them. They asked if they could come and give an assembly. And I thought that all happened this spring. So there I was going along and writing it down. Well, I'll tell you later what it turns out. And then suddenly some of the stuff I started writing, and some of the stuff didn't G up. How could he have gotten these? And then something else had happened. There wasn't time. So I thought, oh, here we go. And then I was very confused about his relationship. I call him in the piece the octopus of connection or something like that. He has his tentacles all over the city. He works with the way that Jawn tries to too. Tries to work with all kinds of partners like the Committee of 70 and CMAC and oh gosh, Philly Youth Votes. He runs an organization called Philly Youth Votes. And so he also, so I thought, I've got to do more homework on this. I'm not quite sure how he hooks up with them and what parts how they mesh. And then there were things, he referred to some statistics that he said was a Pew study. And I sort of thought the numbers didn't look right. So I thought, oh my God, I'm confused. I'm helpless. Maybe I'll just ditch this and pretend I never did it or something. Which is, your worst instincts do come out when you're under the gun. But I talked it over with my mentor and editor, Lorraine, and she said, no, keep at it. So I very abashedly went back to Tom Quinn, and he was very kind and sat through another whole round of questions, which I was much more meticulous, and I actually used a pen and pencil for some of the dates and things like that. And then I had all this information. Then I had to do more research. I had to go back to that Pew study. And although you'll see in the last version of the story that I cut out things like the Pew organization, because I just say a study says that only 6% of youth or high school students are ever offered a chance to register to vote in their high schools, which I think that's very shocking. But the original piece there was much more clutter trying to explain what CMAC was and go to Pew studies and everything. But this is a blog. It's not a newspaper article. It's not a thesis. It's not a term paper. It's a blog. So I breezed over. I definitely care about facts, and I definitely don't, as I say, I do let facts get in the way of a good story. I mean, you have to have the facts right, but you don't have to have every detail. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, one of the reasons I think it went wrong for me was that I came to the story with a lot of presuppositions. I thought I knew what the story was, which is an enormous danger and a trap that you should not fall into. You try to be as dumb as you possibly can, and you do not have the answers. I thought this guy had done this and really raised a lot of votes for, in the midterms. It just turned out not to be true at all. So that's one of the reasons, or one of the many reasons, that it was sloppy reporting, failure to ask the right questions, presuppositions about what the story was. And so I had to do it again. I just had to do it again. And I liked my line. I liked when I got the lead straight and stopped saying this is all about paperwork. It was really about Tom Quinn. And I got the story moving along, and I got the sequence right. It seemed to be pretty good to me. I had a wonderful mentor, my original boss at the Inquirer, who was a fabulous fellow named David Bolt. And he said, you know, Becky, it's funny about your writing. Usually the day after you've written it and you look at it in your print, you say, oh no, did I write that? And then a couple of months later, you look back and say, hey, you know, that looks pretty good. So it's a very emotional sport, this writing thing. You get terrible ups and downs. You're very embarrassed. You know, if I had published that story, the corrections would have been longer than the story itself. And believe me, that's happened in journalism. And and with all the stuff about fake news nowadays, you really, really need to be careful. I mean, I'm not only trained, but I'm temperamentally committed to getting the facts as close to the truth as I possibly can. And I don't think you should even care about being a journalist if you don't want that for yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for answering that question. I know that one of the major components of this whole sequence of events with your story was how it completely changed context when Philadelphia schools stayed shut down. So we wanted to ask you, how do you deal with that in the writing process when the context of the story just changes completely?
Well, that becomes the story. I mean, the news story, and thank you very much, Ananya, because Ananya Kulkarni was the one who pointed out to me, as a good editor she is, that I had buried the lead. I had gone on and on about Tom Quinn until about the third paragraph where I said that the schools had closed and the story was, had changed. Well, that is called burying the lead. And thank goodness I was saved by an editor. We all need editors, and whoever it is, somebody has got to tell you what you've done wrong. And it was a very simple fix. I got that right up there and thanked her profusely. But frankly, that made it a news story, and possibly that made it more appealing. The fact that it had, I don't know if it would have been a story more interesting to a newspaper to have it just a wonderful story about a great project that worked out, or whether, the old, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's bad news, maybe you get a better chance of getting in the paper.
Thank you for that response. I'll move on to our next question related to journalism. Questions of fact-checking and fake news have seen an increased salience in these past few years. How do you ensure that your work is accurate and factual, especially when the facts can change so rapidly as they did with the story?
Well, you rely strongly on your sources, and you check. You go this wonderful internet. You go to the Pew organization. You go to CMAC. You go to the Committee of 70. I looked at a lot of these places to be sure. I was pretty sure. He gave me a lot of information that was fairly easy to check what from news stories. You look at news stories, but basically it's pretty great with the internet, and if you don't do it, you'll be sorry. You just, as I said, that your first commitment is to get it right, get it factual.
Absolutely, thank you. Our next question leans a little bit towards kind of what's the difference between being a writer and being an editor, and if you have a preference. This question is from one of our interns.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I guess I have to confess that if I really had my way, I would have rather been a writer. And I do like to write, but you know, life is what you get. Getting an opportunity to start to be an editor, and then having a boss who was very kind. Actually, you know, I left out one of my little resume things. After graduation, I went to work for a little newspaper, which is another old alternative newspaper in Philadelphia. It was called The New Paper. And it only lasted for about 6 months. But it was the man who was the publisher of Philadelphia Magazine started up a little tabloid that he wanted to be the village voice of the Philadelphia area. Now, you probably don't even know what the Village Voice is, but it was a very hot, wonderful, alternative, sassy, great sort of arts and culture alternative newspaper from the Greenwich Village in New York. Anyway, so I started there, and even then, I was an intern, and I didn't even have a desk. I sat on the floor, and I had an old IBM Selectric newspaper, and I typed in, you know, happenings, like if there was going to be a concert, the lists. I did lists. And very kind editor, they said, would you like to do something? I said, sure, I'd like to. I had young children. And I said, well, what would you, I said, I'd like to go interview Santa Claus, because it was at Christmas time. And he gave me that. And I did a funny column about that. So then I got to do more writing. He gave me more stories. Then the newspaper failed, which was good for me because I had to go out and look for another job. And it was the choir, and they had space for a secretary. So I got to be a secretary at the magazine there, and was sort of doing more scut work. But again, a very kind editor said, would you like to do some writing? And I said, would I? And then I did some stories for him. And I love writing, but you know, editing's good. Editing's terrific. And I'm kind of somewhat of a nitpicky kind of a person anyway, so it suits my temperament. And I loved every day I went to work. I mean, I can't remember a time that I didn't love getting up in the morning and going to work. But I would have loved to have been a writer. I wrote a novel, but anyway.
Thank you. That was really inspiring. Now we're going to move on to more voting related questions in terms of what you learned through interviewing Tom Quinn. What is Tom Quinn's current plan to tackle this budgetary issue while still maximizing voter registration?
Well, he is chagrined, but I mean, I called him that afternoon, and I just thought I was going to call. I was just calling him to get the facts straight, and he said, "I have really bad news for you, but the whole thing's dead." And I said, "Where are their computers now?" He said, "We haven't bought the computers yet. We have a deal. We've got a deal for them. They were going to be what? Could it possibly have been $80? I think he got them for. I haven't checked that fact, but he had a very cheap deal on these tablets, and they had raised $4,000 in 3 days. This team of kids from not kids, adults and other people, parents who had done it with him through CMAC. They had raised $4,000 to get 50 computers. And here they were just about to be delivered, and bang. So he feels very responsible for that. So was that afternoon, I think he was going to have a meeting to see how they could take that money and be sure that the donors got value for their gift. And he was going to put them back into voter registration efforts. They are going to do virtual assemblies at the schools, and they have 6 or 7 schools already signed up to collaborate on this. It's very sad, but the work goes on, and he'll he'll be out on the street and doing the kinds of things that Jawn does, Zooming and doing all the, the kids that kids have their own computers. Some of the kids, this is Philadelphia Public Schools, so some of the kids do have their own computers. And he has the software that lets a kid get access to voter rolls, which are filtered by age and all kinds of other stuff, so that the kids who have computers at home will now go home, use their cell phones and their computers, and contact people their own age, get their information. It's all private information. No, they can't see it, but once they have contacted a voter and the voter agrees to give his or her contacts, it goes into a database which then can be used and pulled up for get out the vote efforts in the last few days, or whatever that's going to be, this crazy election cycle. And so there'll be, I wouldn't like to say that he's paying these students to do this, but the money is going to be deployed, and he's the guy to do it. I mean, he really is, as I said, connected everywhere in the city, and very high energy, and very, very passionate about this cause. And that's what makes a fun story, is if you get a really juiced up person who loves what they're doing.
Definitely. And our next question for you from one of our interns is, what do you personally think is the best way to go about registering voters in such a confusing and chaotic time?
Well, I do think you guys are very lucky to have social media. And for all its downside, and we know about that, it is also an enormous force for the good. And I think that you guys are figuring this out. I mean, every 5 minutes there's a new platform. I mean, TikTok, who knew TikTok? Did you all know TikTok 3 months ago? I hadn't ever heard of it, but there's the dreadful Twitter, and there's Facebook, and there's Instagram, and we old folks try to master these things as fast as our little feet will carry us. But boy, it's a challenge. But you guys are born with it. It's in your blood. And I think it's easy for you and fun for you. And you get this instant, I guess you get some instant feedback from it. I think that's wonderful. I also think there's nothing that beats going out on the street and putting up a table and stopping people. And I know that you've had some very successful tries at that, if you're not rained out that way you were a Friday.
Yes.
I don't know what else. I guess, I don't know. I always do canvassing for but those people are registered. So registering, I've never done a registering effort myself, but I think you guys are certainly know a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question is, considering the political fervor today, do you think it's possible that despite the ongoing pandemic, we can have more registered youth this year than last year?
It's going to be a landslide. It's going to be so crammed. I mean, if that doesn't happen, I'll eat my shoe. I think that this is a huge tipping point for the country, as horrible as it is every day to wake up to some of the stuff that's going on. I think these things are happening, and I don't think it's going to be the same ever again. And I think, I mean, I don't know well, look what happened in 2018. It already was that kind of energy and buzz in the air. And I talked to Tom about this. I said, it's a shame that I think Parkland shooting energized youth to vote in the 2018 midterms. And I'm sorry to say, that a tragedy has to come to wake us up, but there is an enormous power in facing tragedy and ugliness, and it does energize people. And I guess the passion that it arouses is anger, and we know that anger can be destructive, but also can be very constructive. And I think there's enormous pressure. I mean, I've heard so many young people say, I'm voting for people who couldn't vote before. I'm voting for my ancestors. I'm voting for people who have been silenced. And even just that funeral of oh God, I mean, John Lewis was so moving because it was so very much about voting and about transmitting his passion for that cause. Did he have to die for it? No, but that's how people put it to use, and I think that's beautiful. And I think that there is a change, and I think the anger is going to get people off their butts and into the streets and into the voting booths or onto the mail. Anyway.
Thank you. What do you think the best way is that the youth can still help the cause of registering to vote, even as we do live through these crises and tragedies, honestly, every day?
What's the best way
Mhm.
to help the cause? I think just what you're doing. I think, if I could think of another great way, I think we're on track. I think this is going to work.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to transition into questions that our interns wanted to ask you. As editor of Vote That Jawn, what do you enjoy the most about being at Vote That Jawn?
Oh, I just love the stories. I mean, it started with Save Kids Stories, which was what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and we solicited stories from young people that were about their concerns and their passions and their problems, and helping their writing reach an audience by making it clearer, sharper, more focused, shorter, all the things that I mean, it's what I love about editing is you really are bringing something to birth, something to life. And editors have often been, called midwives. And I actually, at one point in my life, I wanted to be a midwife. So I guess I got to be a verbal midwife. And I think that's what I really love to do. And I like I like writing the blogs myself. I've done several, I don't know how many, but it's just a lot of fun for me to talk to people about what they're doing. And I was asked one time, we had a questionnaire at the Inquirer, and you're supposed to describe your job as a writer, I guess it was. And I, being flip as I usually am, I said, I like to talk to strangers and ask rude questions. And that's sort of the way I feel about writing. And just, I love contacting people in that way. I'm kind of shy otherwise.
Thank you. We also wanted to ask you, and this is another question from one of our interns, what advice do you have for a college student that wants to find a career that they love?
Oh boy. Oh, well, work hard, study hard, talk to people in the career space that you're interested in. I can't emphasize that enough. If you want to be an architect, talk to architects. If you want to be, a designer, a dress designer, talk to fashion people. And if you don't have them in your immediate circle and your family doesn't know any people, lawyers or doctors or whatever they want to be, go to your school, your mentors at school, go to your advisors and say, how can I get into this field? How can I talk to somebody in this field? I'll tell you, I think older people like nothing more than to be asked about themselves and about their careers. I mean, they love to talk about themselves, just like I'm loving this session right here. It's just a great deal of fun. It's the one thing you do know a lot about is your own career, and they can give you advice and what to do and what not to do. For instance, it's not universally accepted, but I would, because I didn't do it myself, I wouldn't tell anybody to go to journalism school. Now, yes, obviously there's some great reporters and editors who have come out of J school, but I think there's nothing better than just getting to work a summer job or whatever you are doing something, in my case, in journalism case, you obviously going to work for your school newspaper. You're going to try to get a job. I mean, I went down to the Ambler Gazette when I had 3 babies at home and said, is there anything you want me to do? And they said, yeah, go cover the sewer meeting, and I'd go to the sewer whatever commission, and I would take down the names. I had to get the names right, the spelling right, get the facts right, brought it in. I didn't even have an editor there that I could talk to. Nobody was mentoring me. I just waited until Thursday afternoon when the paper came out, and then I got the paper and I saw what they'd done to my piece. So then I learned how to do the next one better. So you don't have to have absolute direct contact, but try really hard to get either a job or a contact with a knowledgeable adult.
Yes, thank you. That was great advice. Our next question is, did any experiences from your past prove to be formative in pursuing a career in journalism?
Well, yes, sure. I mean, I've just been a byline horse since I was in 3rd grade. Anything that, got into the little school newspaper, anything that I could write a story and see it in print, it just, I don't know, it sort of affirmed who I was. Other experiences, obviously, it's always luck, getting to the right place at the right time, but particularly my mentor, David Bolt, at the Enquirer, when I was a secretary, it just really made all the difference to have somebody who could tell me how bad I was or how good I was and be honest with me. Other experiences, I think writing that novel was good for me. I did creative writing, one course in creative writing. Oh, I know, I did. I majored in creative writing at Penn because basically in those days you had to learn every period of English literature from Beowulf to today. And I came so late to my education, and I had these kids at home, and I knew I would never be able to pass exams on all these technical things. So I took creative writing. That's where I wrote the novel, and I studied with Philip Roth. Was another thing. He was a visiting professor at Penn, the novelist, and I took 2 terms with him, and the course was called Writing About Reading. So he was really talking about literary criticism, and he was funny, he was caring. I mean, I know you probably are all too young to be big Roth followers, but he was a very, very big deal writer, and of course he led a scandalous personal life, which was much criticized and much publicized by all his ex-lovers. And he was made out to be somewhat of a brute, but he, as a teacher, was absolutely Talmudic. He was so dedicated to this art of teaching. He cared so deeply about us. There were only about 10 of us in his class each term. He really worked with us and really went over our stories and really, really, really made a difference to me. And of course, the subject being literary criticism or reading about writing, he would bring in examples from the New York Times, Anatole Broyard's review of somebody's book, and he would just make fun of it, and he'd tear it apart and tell us what not to do. He was just an enormously entertaining and enlightening man, and I just thought very deeply ethical as far as his commitment to students. So that made a big difference. And the first thing I did when I got to be book editor at the Inquirer, I called him up and I said, Philip, you got to put me on the map. I'm going to give you an assignment. You're going to be my first big review. I'm going to put you on the cover of the Philadelphia Inquirer book review. He said, wait a minute. He said, I know how to teach about writing. I don't know how to do it. About criticism, I don't know how to do it. I said, oh no. He said, I'm not going to write for you. So that was that. He misled us.
Thank you. Another question that one of our interns had is, how did you confront the fear that comes with pursuing a creative career?
How did I what?
Confront the fear that comes with pursuing a creative career.
Oh, I was terrified all the time. I was always, I mean, fear is part of what makes you good. And it was very hard because sometimes you really had to stand up for things that were hard to stand up for. Well, pursuing the career, I never thought I'd have the career I had, but I was driven to do something with my talent. And that took me a long way, just the sheer drive. And like I said, the passion to get out there and say something that other people would read really drove me and overcame the fear. But again, mentors helped me a lot. My parents, my family always stood behind me and always helped me when I was terrified. And my husband has been incredible, just bucking me up when I've gotten down about pushing forward. Family helps, and then passion and wanting to change things, make the change. I was the first woman to run I was the first woman along the way on everything. I was the first woman to run the book review, and the man before me, I was deputy for a while, and he was definitely on the team of advancing women. And we hired four African American editors while I was there. We really wanted other voices. We wanted other readers. Because we were all white. Sort of when I started out there, we were pretty white men and women, pretty Ivy League educated, pretty East Coast, pretty dumb. And we really felt that we needed to be taught, we needed to learn something about the way we were reading books. And, the Times has just enormous power, or did then. I'm not sure it does still, but in those days, if you got a review in the Times, it made all the difference. And people spend 10 years writing a book. They have one day, one review. It's a huge responsibility. So understanding that made me overcome my fear. I guess there were some things I never overcame. I really didn't like public speaking much, but I got used to that. Anyway, yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, no problem. Our next question is, as a shy person, how did you overcome the fear of interviewing people and reaching out, even reaching out to strangers at times?
Well, that's easy because you have a format. If you're shy, you don't know what to say to people. You're embarrassed. You don't know how to start. But when you're interviewing people, you've written down the questions and you say hello and you introduce yourself, and you have the backing of an institution. I come from the New York Times, or I come from the Amber Gazette, or I come from the newspaper. People like to be, most people like to talk about themselves. So you have an entree and you don't have to look particularly good. My mother one time looked at me and said, you don't look like an editor. And I said, well, who are you thinking about? Diana Vreeland. Diana Vreeland was the editor of Vogue. And that was my mother's idea of what an editor should look like. But you don't have, you don't have to dress different. The shyness, I don't think it's an asset, but it shouldn't stop you if you really want to. And it's fun. You get to talk to people and ask rude questions, which you would never do if you were at a party or on campus.
Thank you. I have another question from one of our interns, and this one asks, when and why did you write a novel? What was that experience like versus more short form pieces in journalism?
When did I write the book?
Yes.
Oh, I did that. It was an assignment for my creative writing class. It was sort of a Gothic novel set in a mansion in Philadelphia, and it was great fun. I still have it. I had it printed out and bound with, paper bound, and sometimes I start reading it, but it's so bad that I never finish it. No, I like short stories. I got a couple of short stories published in the Pen, whatever that magazine was, Pen Review, which I loved having those published and was encouraged by that. But, writing creatively is much, much, much harder. And I don't think I had the discipline to do it. You can ask Ms. Carey. I mean, it is really draining in a way that journalism probably never can be. You're going into your soul and you're digging in there, no matter if it's, no matter if it's about something else, I think it's always about you. And it's hard. And journalism is not easy, but it's a lot easier than that.
Thank you. Our next question is from Miss Carey. She wanted me to ask you about what it was like trying to get into UPenn and what the chair said when you were interviewed.
Oh my God. Well, as I said, I had 3 children at home. I had 2 years at another college and dropped out, gotten married, had 3 babies. And the youngest one was, oh God, I guess he was about 6 when I decided to go back to Penn. And I went night school. It was a thing called the School of General Studies, College of General Studies, I think. And it was from, 6 o'clock on at 6 to 9 at night. And my husband was home and could take care of the kids. And I went in there and I took several literature courses. I loved them. Wonderful. Oh God, there was a wonderful woman named Nina Auerbach. Peter Kahn will remember her. Anyway, I took all these courses and I got very good marks. And I thought, well, after about 6 or 8 of these night school courses, I thought maybe Henry's old enough now. Maybe I can go full time and maybe I could take honors English. So I took my little resume, my little transcript up to the department head, the guy that ran the honors program. He's an 18th century scholar, typical. And he said, Mrs. Sinkler, I see that your transcript qualifies you for this honors program. Would you tell me, I see you're married. I said, yes, I am. And he said, I see that you have children. Yes. How many? I have 3 children. Do you have full-time help at home? At which I either just hooted with laughter or answered politely, no. And he said, well, I'm afraid for that, because of that, I will have to deny you entry into the honors program. You can't possibly manage it. And in those days, I mean, as I said to somebody this morning, I was no Rosa Parks. I didn't stand up and I didn't fight back and I didn't think about getting a lawyer. I mean, there was no precedent for this. This was in the late 60s, early 70s, I'd say. Yeah, that. So instead of that, I I took Henry, my 7-year-old, and put him in a bar across the street from Bennett Hall, and held the students to take care of him while I was at school. And then I'd pick him up afterward. You couldn't do that nowadays. You'd be arrested. So there, he learned to be a very good pool player because all the guys liked him a lot, and they taught him how to play pool. But I managed. I mean, it's the old career and motherhood thing, but I think we're getting past that now, maybe. I mean, it'll always be there, but it was there in spades for me. And Penn was good for me. I liked it, but it was restricted.
Thank you so much for your response. That's really inspiring to hear that story. Miss Carrie has one more question for you, and she wants us to ask about your first piece for safekidsstories.com and why stories about bad children made you feel safe.
Oh, that's great. I still have all my bad children books, and they were always what I wanted to write because I was convinced that I was evil. And I was a third child, and I was a terrible brat. I cried and I threw tantrums, and I just hated rules of any kind. I kicked and fought and screamed and wouldn't go to bed and wouldn't eat my food. So I was convinced that I was unredeemably evil. And so these books were very comforting to me. The heroes were bad. Madeline said, who said poo poo to the tiger in the zoo, and all the other rule breakers. And I did not want to, I hated Little Women. I mean, a little bit of Joe I could relate to, but all those other creeps, no. I liked, what's her name? Kathy and Gone in Wuthering Heights.
Thank you so much for all your responses. That's the last of the questions we have for today, and it's just about 1:00, so we're wrapping up. But thank you so much for your time and taking the time to answer all of our.
It was great fun. I'll put those sloppy notes and my comments there, and then I'll put the finished thing in there. We'll get it if anybody cares.
Absolutely. Everyone make sure to check out the finished piece when you have a chance.
And go out and work hard, work on your own careers, and work to register people to vote.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, bye.